This is a big day for me. Not just having you all here, which is a big day in itself. I'm delighted to be with you. But this past year and a half, I have been doing quite a lot. As you all know, I've done 365 television programs, which are seen every day on Asta, and on sadhana twice a day on Sunday. I have written 2 small books, Sadhu Beware and The Story Behind the Story. I've given several important lectures, including also in Italy. And a year and a half ago, I began a course which I felt was very important for not just India, but everywhere. But particularly I felt the need here, called Material Success Through Yoga Principles. And I finished it today in time to get up and rush over here. So it is, I'm not putting it out as a book, but if it were, it would be over 620 pages, which is what it is in the manuscript. And that's been a lot of work, but I am very pleased. Somebody wrote to me after he'd read lesson 3. He said, "You're putting so much into these lessons that I don't see how you can continue all the way to the end of 26 lessons." And I myself wasn't sure how I would do it. I just prayed to God for His grace. And the lessons, I thought they would average 13 each. They averaged 13 pages. Instead, they averaged 25 pages. And there's a lot of information there. It's been actually quite fun. My particular way of doing things is to not plan them out in advance. I don't like that intellectual exercise of plotting my course. I simply approached each lesson as it came and thought, "Now God, what shall I do?" And it works better that way. I wrote a meditation for each lesson. I didn't even think what it might be until I came to the meditation section. I said, "All right, God, what do we do now?" The more you try that, I really recommend it as a method. You'll be amazed how wonderfully it works, because if you allow Him to, He can inspire all of us. I have just, this last lesson is on the right use of ego. That's a very interesting subject. Many people cannot imagine themselves without their egos. They cannot imagine the teaching which many spiritual teachers give them, that you have to give up the ego. And people naturally think, that's all I've got. How can I give that up? Yes, I can give up desire for coffee. All right, I can give up desire for fame. Well, I can give up desire for power. I can give up just about everything. Wait a minute, not my own ego. And what Yogananda explained, and it's a wonderful thing that he said, because naturally you wonder, this is all I know. He said, you do not give up the ego. That was an incredible statement when I read that in his Gita commentaries back in 1950. What happens is that you realize that God became your ego, and then He became God again, and you don't dissolve the ego, because there's always in that omniscience, there is still the memory of having been you. And therefore, any time that, say, some devotee asks for your help or something, God doesn't take your form. It's your own self that remanifests yourself. In that omniscience, that little tiny wave of the ocean, which was yourself over many, many incarnations, comes back. When you pray to Krishna, it isn't God who comes in the form of Krishna, although yes, it is. But at the same time, it's Krishna, God who became Krishna, who finally, after many lives, attained oneness with God. And it is God, but it is also Krishna. And that will happen for every one of us. That someday And mind you, you can't get away from this destiny. You may want to. You may think, well, I'm having so much fun playing with my mud pies. And so you go on life after life. In fact, there's a very almost frightening passage in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, where he says that the words I don't remember at the moment, but the meaning of it, as Yogananda explained it, is that many souls that are manifested at the beginning of a day of Brahma, because you know when a day of Brahma ends and it goes into the night of Brahma, all souls are left as a memory at that place where they had arrived. So it isn't as if at the beginning of a day of Brahma you have to manifest again as a cockroach and you've been all those things. But you, wherever you were, that's where you are again. But he said many souls that appear again in the beginning of a day of Brahma are still wandering in delusion at the end of a day of Brahma. That is a long time. And the question arises, how many days of Brahma do we go on? It's quite frightening. Think of billions and billions and billions of years. It's not a very pleasant thought until you stop and reflect that time really doesn't exist. And whether you want to take a few trillion years or whether you want to do it now, that's your affair. You can do it any time you want to. God isn't in no hurry. He wants you to come to Him, but He wants you to come sincerely. And so He even gives you tests to make sure if you really love Him, or if you think, well, yes, I love you, but. And He says, I can wait. And so we wonder. Yes, it's an amazing story. You know, the wonderful thing about it is there is not a single story of anybody who found union with God in any religion, any age, who ever said, oh, what a long time He made me wait. They realized in that moment that there was no time at all. Patanjali's description of enlightenment is the simple word smriti. What is smriti? Memory. You remember that, oh, this is what I really am. And when you have that memory, I remember when I was a child, I used to see lights and feel my consciousness expand and different things. Then at the age of 9, I got a serious case of colitis, and I was at a time there delirious. And when I came out of that illness, I began to equate my expansion of awareness with any kind of unusual awareness with delirium. And I put it off as if I didn't want anything anymore of that. Years later, when I met my guru and meditated and had experiences that helped me to remember that state, it was as if I'd received it, as if I'd never really lost it. When you find God, it's not as if you need to take a notebook and try to remember everything so you won't forget it. You will remember, even if it was billions of years ago, you will say, oh yes, of course. When you feel divine love in meditation, you don't say, no, I've got to remember this one. Your first thought is, but of course, that's what I am. It's completely natural. And so that is who you are. And your destiny ultimately is to achieve that. You don't have another destiny. God made you. And there's nothing else that you really are. How did He make you? He didn't make you the way we make things outside, like we want to make a statue, so we mold the clay or we chip the stone. Nothing like that. Rather, He became us. And the explanation of God, as my guru wrote in Autobiography of Yogi, he said, the divine eye is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. You have a center in your own body. You're not omnipresent in your own body. Your center is right here at a point in your medulla oblongata. This is where the sperm and the ovum first unite, and there's a flash in the ether, and any soul in the astral world that is ready to come back then, if it is in harmony and attunement with that vibration of light, it will come in. A friend of mine in America, she is a member of the Palo Alto Church. She scolded her little boy one time. He was, I don't know, 3, 5 years old. And he got very upset with her, and he stormed out of the room and slammed the door. And then he came back, and he said, "And you weren't my first choice either, Slam." And later she said, "Well, who was your first choice?" "Oh, some woman in the Philippines, but she was already taken." And so we come into this body, and we seem to be children of our parents, and certain genes make us look a little bit like our parents, but you know, we're not that much like them. The human being has free choice, and you cannot explain him entirely in terms of genes and DNA and everything like that, because we are much higher than the animals. The animals have no choice. The soul evolves gradually from lower to higher stages, and when I said that you may have been a cockroach before, it's entirely possible. And you look at a cockroach and they go, "No, not that." But the truth is that your form also, as you are right now, is not much different from a cockroach. If you want to think of yourself as you really are, which is that blazing infinite light, that's who you are. And so you look a little bit more elegant than a cockroach. But the truth is that no form can define you. When we think of God as Krishna or Kali or any of those forms, those are forms we place on God. He doesn't have that form. Ganesha, Kali, Shiva, Vishnu, all these things, they're human creations. They are beautiful things because you cannot think of God with love if He has no form. There's a song of Ram Prasad. He was a great devotee of Divine Mother in Bengal 2 or 3 centuries ago. And he says, "Ore shotto 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 ved tarama nirakara." Thousands of Vedas say, my Tara has no form, my Divine Mother. And yet, how can he love her? How can we love her? How can we love God if we don't have some sort of thing that we can conceive of as lovable? The mother is lovable instinctively to us. The mother is closer to us than the father. Some people have great devotion to Krishna or all other forms. All of these are not God. When Arjuna, in the 11th chapter, is it, of the Bhagavad Gita, has the cosmic vision, and he sees Krishna with thousands of arms and thousands of legs and thousands of heads, it doesn't mean that he's looking like a monster with all these forms. I mean, the gods have many forms in our visualization of them, but that's only to show them in their different aspects, qualities, in movement. But what that means is that in Samadhi, when you merge in God, you see that God has all these forms. God is you, but He can't come through to you as you because you don't look at Him. You look away from Him. You know, it's not so difficult. It's extremely easy, but on the other hand, habit plays its own games with us. And even after you feel divine love, and after you feel bliss, and you feel that inspiration, and you think, I'll never lose touch with this. I remember when I first felt, I used to go, this is when I was 23, I used to go into the dining room at lunchtime and put my plate aside of food, then go to the chapel and meditate for half an hour and then come back. And one day, I was meditating, and at the end of that half hour, suddenly I felt this enormous joy flood over me. And I thought, well, of course. It seemed so self-evident. That's what I am. And common sense told me you should sit here and enjoy it and prolong your thought of enjoyment, of Ananda. And I thought, but it's so natural, I'll never lose touch with this again. So I went down and ate. For First mouthful of food, it was gone. It's not so easy. You feel this bliss inside, you feel this joy inside, and then other things come. I've got to go shopping, I've got to go buy some coffee, I've got to go to work, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And so the world takes over, and we get a little bit of touch again. I remember in California, when you go from Los Angeles to New York by car, already in Banning, California, which is before the desert, but only about an hour and a half or less from Los Angeles, you see the first advertisement on a big billboard for some hotel in New York. I don't know if it's still true today. It was true 60 years ago. Anyway, you have to go a long distance before you find another billboard saying something about New York. Then you get closer to New York and more billboards, and finally it's nothing but billboards about New York. Hotels, restaurants, everything. The same thing is with the divine path. In the beginning you get a little taste, and you think, oh wow, it must be just a few miles down the road. And you go miles and miles and there's nothing and nothing. And you're kept animated by that first memory. And you think, well, this, I know it's something worth having, I've had it, and I must work for it. And if you have the karma, and not everybody has that karma. Many people come onto the path for a little while and they think, well, I kind of like wanting to be famous. I kind of like having success in the world. I kind of like this, I kind of like that. One time I asked my guru a kind of surprising question, but a brother disciple of mine named Norman had a vision of himself with Master on the island of Lemuria. Now nobody knows for sure if Lemuria even existed. I don't know for sure if it was a real vision, but stranger things have happened in this universe, and I was appalled to think that that was 80,000 years ago and he was a disciple then. I thought, my God, how long does this take? And I said to Master, sir, have I been your disciple for thousands of years? And he said, it's been a long time, that's all I'll say. And I wasn't wholly satisfied with that one. I said, does it always take that long? I didn't want to be the only one left out in the cold. He said, oh yes, desires for name and fame and this thing and that thing take them away again and again. And so you see people with a little bit of spiritual karma will come and get a taste of it, and then their worldly karma comes in and drags them back. Then it comes back again because no effort put out. You know, this is one great thing that the masters bring to the world. They have a few disciples whom they liberate. They have a few disciples whom they have accepted as disciples and push along the road to God realization. There are many whom they just touch. There's a poem in Sanskrit which says that even a moment in the company of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion. And my guru one time, there was a printer at Mount Washington. He was not a devotee. He used to rather laugh at us devotees for spending our time meditating and seeking God instead of working efficiently and so on. But he was a good printer, and so he worked there. And one time, well, somebody talked to him about spiritual things, and he began to become a devotee, and he began to take this seriously. And at that time, Master invited him to come up to his interview room on the 3rd floor upstairs. And he took him in his hands like this, and just stared into his eyes. And this man, Orville, was just dazed afterwards. He said, I don't know what happened, But since then he became a devotee. And so what the masters do, that idea of one moment in the company of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion. It's true that the presence of masters blesses everybody, the very ground they walk on. When you land in an airplane from abroad on Indian soil, you feel the power. You live in the midst of it, you're not aware of it. But every time I've landed, I've felt a real power in the soil. Even this time when I came back from Italy and the plane landed, suddenly I felt this great surge of joy. And it was nothing I could see, but the blessings that the rishis have left in this land are very great. You are blessed to live here, and it makes me sad when I see that, like in every country, most Indians just wander around, and they're tourists in the time zone as foreigners are tourists in a space zone, and they live here for a lifetime, and then they go to Portugal or who knows where. But don't lose this opportunity, because not only, Swami Shankara said, it's very hard to become a human being, to reach that level. And I don't think that, as I analyze that statement, Master quoted it, but I don't see it as hard for an animal because he doesn't have free will. He's not struggling toward anything because he doesn't have free will. He doesn't have any ego. The ego is what man has, and it's not, most people equate ego with arrogance. That's not true. Ego is the sense of separateness. Ego is what you feel when you think, I'm suffering. Animals know that some sort of suffering is going on. They have a little sense of their being in pain, but it's not serious. Whereas with human beings, they know. The ego says, wait a minute, I'm suffering. Well, what can I do about this suffering? How can I get out of it? And so the ego, asking this question over many lives, begins to think, well, the solution to this suffering is not sex or money or power or all the things people look for to achieve the happiness that they know is their inner dream and birthright, but only God. And it takes a long time to reach that. The cockroach doesn't know anything but that it's a cockroach. And its next life it may be a spider. And who knows? All the different things that people, or I should say that the soul has to live in that body, but it's not hard in the sense of putting out the effort to become a human being. I think there is some difficulty when, as a human being, you fall back to that state. And yes, you can. If you want to live like an animal, then you can be an animal. God's in no hurry. He has eternity. He sees your final oneness with Him as if it were today. But you have to suffer, and what a shame. And so I don't think the hardness, yes, possibly for man when he goes back to that state, and mind you, if he keeps sinning and living in evil, he can go back very far. I'm not going to describe how far, but then he has to come up all that way again. Sri Krishna said to Uddhava, looking at a beetle, said, Uddhava, one day, once in one incarnation, that beetle was Indra. To think that Indra could fall that low, I don't like to believe it. I like to think that it's a myth. Nonetheless, from the standpoint of Indian philosophy and of truth, it is possible. Because until you reach Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you will still be able to fall as far as you want to. And so, what I think is very difficult, however, is the suffering involved. This world is full of suffering. Get away, Krishna said, from my ocean of suffering and misery. That is the nature of this world. And the thing is that it doesn't come all the time. And so when you feel well and happy, then you don't remember the suffering. The trouble is that when the suffering comes, you don't remember the pleasure. And why go through all that? Up and down and up and down. Why continue? As long as you live in an ego, there will be great suffering. As long as you live in an ego, there will be great rises and falls like the ocean waves. But the goal of it all is to reach that point where you suddenly discover, but this little ego is you. You became this ego. It's like little slivers of glass reflected in the sunlight, and they shine in the sunlight. And when it's really shining, you don't even see the shape of the piece of glass. All you see is that light of the sun reflected there. But as the sun goes down, you see the glass. It loses that brilliance, and you see the glass again. And so the more we can reflect the divine light, the less the individual is seen. All you see is that divine light. Just like sunset, when the sun is on the clouds, they look so beautiful. And yet a few minutes later, where is that beauty? Just a gray cloud, uninteresting, not beautiful, becoming dark. And so our goal in life is to wake up and realize that we should not waste time. This is what Shankara said. It's very hard to reach the human level. Don't waste that opportunity. And then, it's very hard to be born in India. I don't say you don't find liberation except in India. There have been great saints in all countries. But there is that very special blessing that India has, that great rishis have lived here for thousands of years. And that is something that if you tune into, I find when I lecture to audiences in India, there is a more natural openness than anywhere else. I've told you before how years ago I lectured in London. 1 hour lecture, the first half hour, I had to spend to convince them I was not a fraud. The next half hour, I had to spend convincing them that maybe I wasn't crazy. By the end of the lecture, I'd brought them from a minus zone to 0. Nobody likes to lecture to that. I just have never been back to lecture in England. Yes, I've stopped by the airport. Yes, I visited friends. I don't want to lecture to that kind of consciousness. And I don't mean that all English are like that. There's, of course, wonderful devotees there. But that, in contrast with Italy, for example, where there's real openness, America, where there's good openness, India, where it's marvelous. It's a thrill to talk here, because I find that people automatically, even atheists, they think they don't believe in God, but all they're really rejecting is people's definitions of God as Krishna or this thing or that thing. But they somehow, you see, even atheists, somehow understand things that other people don't understand because it's in their blood. They've been raised in that. I don't mean that Indians are less ignorant than other people. You find the same stupid questions asked here as everywhere else. You find the same ignorance everywhere and the same delusion that I will find everything I want when I'm rich and famous and powerful and this thing and that thing. All you have to look at is the pages of the newspaper and see all the things people are aspiring to. It's no different from anywhere else. They want to be American. God, I wish if only they knew what a mistake that was. No, America is a wonderful country. But what people out of the country love about America is not America. They love TV and stock market and computers and all those things. But America, underneath, has a great spirituality because it was founded with that desire. Pilgrim Fathers came seeking religious freedom, and that is still the core of America. 95% of Americans believe in God. 70% of Americans, I don't have my statistics exact, pray. 30% meditate. There's a lot of spiritual hunger in that country that you might not believe. India and America have a destiny together, and in the future that destiny will be fulfilled as they lead the world toward Dharma, both outward and inward. But in our own path, we must wake up and realize that no fulfillment that we can possibly find in this world will ever satisfy us for long. You think you've got it, and just as you reach out to touch it, it turns to dust. Nothing in this world can give you what you are in yourself. It's not that you have to convert to one religion or another. It's not that you have to follow one path or another. What you need, and all I try to do, is convert people to their own higher self. This is what is meant by self-realization. Your true self is not the ego. Your true self is that infinite sun, you might say, that reflects off of every little sliver of glass, that reflects in every pinpoint of space. And you, your divine consciousness in you, is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. I've discovered that this is a very good way of being inspired by whatever you want to do. You all know that I've written a lot of music. What I do is, if I have a theme that I want to write about, I go to the center of that theme. And then at that center, I understand the melody and the words. And it just comes to me often just in a moment. That song, Though Green Summer Fade, that came to me in, I think, 5 minutes. This is because if you put yourself at the center of anything, God is center everywhere. He's at the center of that song. He's at the center of any problem you face in work. He's at the center of every problem you have in life. And if you put yourself at that center, you will understand the divine center, because for every problem, remember this, for every problem there is a solution. The problem could not exist if there were not also a solution. Become solution conscious. Don't think, oh, problems, problems. A friend of mine in college became a famous pianist in Europe, Julius Katchen. I remember him going by, took life very seriously. He was going by my window in the dormitory, and he said, problems, problems. Well, with those problems, you're not going to find solutions. But if you say, well, here's the problem, but there's got to be a solution, and that solution is, you'll find amazingly how often that solution will come to you just like that. It's astonishing. If you want to understand another person, don't try to figure him out. Why on earth would he do this? Well, when he was a child, he had this particular trauma, and maybe that's it. Like going to a psychiatrist's couch and you stretch out and the psychiatrist asks you all the questions of what you were in the past and so on. That is not the way to really understand people. You cannot understand them by analyzing them. Beyond consciousness, of which the main feature is intellect, is superconscious, of which there is no feature except solution consciousness. It is, and therefore it knows. He knows, naught else knows. And so in that state, if you meditate on another person, you understand him, you become him. The way to understand anything is to become that. I know when I've given lectures at conferences at different times, they've asked me to give the text of my speech so they can publish it. And I've had to disappoint them always, because I've said I never prepare a speech. I never know what I'm going to say. I never know what I have said afterwards. I wipe the slate clean so that I can approach the same subject if I have to with a completely free mind. I don't think, well, let's see, I said this in, January 1980. Let's see, what was it? I don't do that. It doesn't exist for me. I suppose I could recreate it if I put my mind there, but I don't like to. I like to let it come from God's inspiration, which is always at the moment. You notice, as they've said, that no two thumbprints are the same. No two snowflakes are the same. That's inconceivable. They all look alike to us, but they aren't. There's always some subtle difference. No two moments in your life are the same. Every moment is different. If you can live in that moment, at the center of that moment, that is the way to be creative. Don't think in terms of what you've done before. Don't let habit guide your life. Don't let rules guide your behavior. But try to live more by what God gives you. He will never outrage your sensibilities. Or if he does, it's because you were ignorant. He will always act from truth and wisdom. And so, if you can think, living in the present, living at your center, and think of every moment at its center, everything that you have to do at its center. I don't know how to describe that more carefully, I cannot give you a graphic description, and yet I know it works, and therefore I say, please try it. Meditate on what I say and try to understand it from inside. Because it's amazing how wonderfully it works. You just become what you're trying to do. You see, God is everywhere. God is you. You can't say, I am God, but God is you. And once you realize that He is everything, and He became you, you don't lose anything when you lose your ego. That's the amazing thing. You think, well, at least I will have to lose that, and I don't want to lose my ego. I don't want to lose my self-awareness. You don't. It just expands and becomes infinite. And I used to think when I was new on the path, well, gosh, all those people becoming omnipresent, doesn't omnipresence become a bit crowded? But it isn't like that. It is. And you just merge into that. That is what you really are. So anyway, this year and a half has been a busy year for me. I'm in my 80th year. It's a time of one's life when most people put their feet up on the desk and read books or novels or whatever, or meditate. But my Guru has given me things that I must finish. And I will be happy if my last breath is exhausted in helping him and serving him his cause. So I do know certain other things that I need to do. But this one I didn't even know I needed to do. It has taken me a year and a half, and I didn't know I needed to do 365 television programs, but I did them too. So please give me a break and let me think what I'm gonna, let me go back to my ideas of what I should do. But I am so thrilled to be here with you, and I have to say that this is an important time for me. It's not quite the exact day. It's the day I finished my lessons. I have to go over the last lesson a little bit and edit, but you can say it's done. But on Monday, I have my spiritual anniversary. 57 years ago was when I met my Guru. And you may say, well, 57 years, that's a long time. Yeah, if you counted the human lives, it may be a long time. I remember when I was 6 years old, I asked my daddy, when will I be able to drive? He said, oh, not until you're 18. I thought, oh, that means never. 18 from 6, my gosh, 12 more years. And of course, 18 has passed a little bit ago. Still seems like yesterday to me, but it won't to you. And 57 years is just nothing. But it has been a life of wonderful, wonderful joy. Many people think that to be a disciple means slavery. I was in Milan a couple of months ago, and I was there to launch the book Conversations with Yogananda in Italian. And actually it was a very big event. There were the hall was big enough for 500 people, but the hotel said this is vacation period, you'd be lucky if you get 25. Well, we got over 800, and there were people standing around the wall and sitting on the floor and in all sorts of positions. But it was a thrill to realize that all these years and so many things have been accomplished. I'm grateful for it. That was just one of the many things I've done in this year and a half. Plus having a few illnesses like pneumonia and so on. Actually, pneumonia turned out to be a great blessing because it gave me the inspiration for writing this course. I was lying on my bed practically unconscious, in fact virtually, when a doctor came in. Now you know what doctors do when they see you ill in bed in the hospital. They say, what can I do? How can I help? They bring out their stethoscope and listen to your breathing and all sorts of things. This doctor came up to me and said, sir, I would like your help. I thought, help? I don't know what kind of help I can give in this position. He said, sir, I have a son in university in Canada. I have many financial responsibilities. How is it possible to meet all those responsibilities and be completely dharmic? And I said to him, actually, I have learned from experience that the more you are dharmic, the more you succeed. The trouble is that lying there practically unconscious on the bed, I was not an advertisement for success. And his answer was sort of, yeah. But the next day, Leela came over to the hospital with my lunch. Forgive me, but the hospital food is not quite as good as hers. So, not at all as good. And I sort of lifted my head and, using willpower, came out of an unconscious state that I'd been in. And I said, Leela, you know what I ought to do is write a correspondence course on material success through yoga principles. And after lunch, I fell asleep again, and I was unconscious until Keshava, who used to be my secretary many years ago, walked in to relieve Leela so she could go back and make my dinner. And I said, Keshava, get a pen and some paper. And I sort of woke myself out of this sleep and dictated the introduction to the lessons and the entire outline of the 26 lessons. And then I collapsed again. But that's what I've been working on ever since February of last year. And yes, it has been a joy. And yes, living with Master has been a joy. And I cannot think, when I was at that thing in Milan, there was a press conference beforehand, and somebody said to me, but you've been on this path so many years, why are you still a disciple? I said, that is my honor. As my guru said, those who achieve enlightenment even still hold in special respect their own guru who gave them that enlightenment. And this is what I always will be, is a loving, humble disciple of my Master. I may become a master myself, I don't care. Yes, I care about that, but I don't care about this. I will still be loyal and humble before him, because he was the doorway and is the doorway through which I can find and am finding anything that I will ever achieve. One disciple said, oh, I don't want to follow his will completely. I need to have my own will. And I quoted this to Master, wanting to ask him, wanting to see how he would respond to that kind of a doubt, of a challenge. And he said, he's not free. As long as the ego is bound by desires and so on, you're not free. When you take cocaine, which I hope nobody in this room does, it isn't your free will that takes you into having cocaine, it's habit, it's delusion. You're free when you can be guided by wisdom, not by ignorance. And this boy was not free. In fact, to scare you a little bit, I find it a bit spine stiffening. My guru said to him, if you have very complex karma, he had many spiritual experiences, but he said, if you leave the path in this lifetime, it will take you another 200 incarnations to come back to the point you have already reached. That's a long time. Incarnations, not years. He left. And it's a sad thing, but it does happen. Don't be very aware to the point of being frightened of delusion. It has great power. And you may feel, oh, nothing will touch me. But until you're in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you will not be free. Even at Sabikalpa, one can fall. Because while he's in Samadhi, yes, he's one with God, but then he comes back to the ego, and the ego can't maintain that state yet. And so it can still infuse delusion in the person again. My guru spoke of several people, not known to him personally perhaps, yes, one known to him, who had reached Sabikalpa Samadhi and still fell. Realize that it is a razor's edge and you can cut yourself, but there is no other solution. Don't be a coward. Take up that staff and walk that trail, because there is no other way to your own self Anything else you seek will not be you. It will be just thinking, experimenting, but it will not be you. You must know who you are. That is the one duty the universe has placed on your shoulders. Nobody else can do it for you. Even a guru cannot do it. He can only encourage you to the extent that you open yourself to him. But if you don't listen, if you don't obey, he won't impose himself, because it goes against the divine plan. Each of us has free will. We have a right. This is the one freedom we have. You don't have freedom to eat, drink tea or not. Habit, samskaras, all things of the past decide those things for you. The one freedom you have is either to love God or reject Him. And that's not an eternal freedom, because you cannot reject Him forever. But you can reject Him for many billions of years if you choose. Why do it? Why do it? There is only one way out. Why not take that way? Love God. It's the only thing worth loving, because it's the only thing lovable. I said to Anandamayi Ma many years ago that all of us in America have great love for you. She answered, there is no love except God's love. A beautiful answer. Human love is not love. It's desire. It seems like love, no harm in it. At least it fans the heart quality. But real love is only possible in God. Let's seek Him. Well, God bless you all.